When you watch a piece of entertainment, whether that be a movie or animation or a drama series, you tend to get hooked on it for different circumstances. Some of these works may catch you due to the great action and adventure that you experience. Some of them will make you think very hard due to the extremely complex storylines and plots. Others may hold you dear to the feels that you experience, the sympathies or the sadness, the happiness or the anger. But when you watch Girls' Last Tour, the thing that really catches me is the calm peacefulness that comes to your soul and the appreciation in the simple things that are very important but often neglected in life. Now, there are other stories out there that are slice of life stories that can also basically bring out those feelings. However, the unique nature of Girls' Last Tour, the fact that it is a post-apocalyptic story where even the basics of life are taken away from the main characters, helps emphasize just how important many of these simple things are. And because of that, I think Girls' Last Tour does give a very unique story, even compared to a lot of other slice of life stories out there, in that it can convey these points through the situation and the environment that these girls experience. So, what's up, people, and welcome to part 5 of Girls' Last Tour. And today I would like to discuss episode 5, which is a very interesting episode in that it does something a little bit different from the other episodes. It actually breaks the episode down into 3 separate stories, which are somewhat completely off from the main story, but still conveys the basic feels that I talked about. The feeling of calm and sereneness, the feeling of appreciation. And yes, it is true that all the other episodes also were kind of off on their own. There really isn't any tangible plot except the journey that they continue to go on, which they do here as well. But here, it seems to be somewhat off from even that journey. The emphasis of what they are experiencing in the here and now seems to be the important aspect rather than the path to which they want to go. And so I found this episode to be very interesting. I would call it the Snippets of Life's episode. And because of that, I found this to be very enjoyable. Now, as mentioned, this episode breaks down into 3 separate stories, each one conveying a different message to the overall theme. And it was very interesting to see each of these. So I'll go over each one in succession. The first one, which is titled House, was probably my favorite of the 3. So the story starts where the 2 girls are continuously traveling down the road as usual, and they're looking at the various buildings around, noticing that, there probably were houses for the previous people who lived there. And of course, considering the fact that these 2 girls live a nomadic lifestyle, you start asking, what exactly is the purpose of a house? And they go into some technical discussions with regards to that. And eventually, they come to a point where they decide to take a break and go into one of these buildings and wonder exactly if these empty rooms are considered houses. And eventually, after the discussion of what a house is, a shelter from the environment, some place where you could always come back to for protection, Yu does ask a valid question, whether their house is the Kettenkrad, the vehicle that they're traveling in. And technically, of course, Chi answers that's not exactly what the definition of a house is. And while they're doing that, they eventually find a room with furniture in there. So they decide to take a break and call it a night in that room. Now the room has clean water and it seems to also have lighting. And that then gets these two girls to wonder what it's like to live in a house. And it goes into some very nice discussions. Of course, in the case of Chi, she wants to see, she imagines the house with a really nice library, a bookshelf with all her favorite books in there. And of course, for you can only dream and imagine of a food cabinet with all her favorite food and chocked full inside. And of course, this starts making them dream and think about what their ideal house would be, and that eventually gets them to really enjoy that night, which I thought was very, very nice. But eventually, reality comes in, and she does understand that as much as it is nice to stay in that one location, it would be extremely comfortable. As a matter of survival, it's not practical because of the fact that they still need to move forward to be able to find, food and additional material to survive. And so as much as it's really tempting to stay in that one location, both Chi and Yu decide to move on. And it is at the very final part of that story where they do decide that it is the Kettenkrad, their transport, that is their home. It is not a house, but it is their home, and as such they do appreciate the things that they get from being able to travel with this transportation. And so I found this to be extremely enjoyable part of the episode. And once again, it was my favorite story of the three. Now the second story, titled Nap, is probably the most abstract and the strangest of the three stories. The story takes place the day after the girls had a very long evening where they remained awake. Mostly due to Yu's insistence on playing this version of a game which I will call reverse Jenga. Place where they were trying to stack a bunch of stones on top of each other without having it collapse. And because they stayed up for such a long time, it ends up with the next day Chi having a very difficult time driving the Kettenkrad, and they almost get into an accident. This, of course, makes Chi realize that they need to take a break, and they decide to take an afternoon nap, which, of course, Yu is absolutely happy about because she can sleep anywhere. And so the two decide to go to sleep in that location. And this results in a very unusual dream sequence that she experiences. And so the first part of the dream starts off where she ends up being a piece of the reverse Jenga puzzle, and this giant version of Yu is standing next to her, trying to play the game. And Chi is like, "You're not thinking of trying to destroy this stack of stones, are you?" And Yu is smiling away, and you could see in her mind her thinking, of course, because isn't that what all the fun is all about? And of course, she kind of blows on the stack of stones, and that sends the whole thing tumbling. And she goes flying off down into oblivion, and she falls into a big, massive body of water, and that starts the second part of her dream, where now she is riding on a fish in the middle of the ocean. And you could think of this as her version of Jonah and the whale, or maybe even Pinocchio, except that instead of a whale, she encounters a giant aquatic version of you. And once again, she is like, you're not thinking of doing what I think you might be doing. And Yu looks at her, and you could tell that she's thinking, well, of course, because isn't that what all the fun is all about? And with that, she opens her mouth and swallows Chi whole, and Chi goes, flying off again. And it is at that point that she finally wakes up. Yeah, and with that, and a few interactions, colorful interactions between Chi and Yu afterwards, the story does end. And so it is very abstract. It's like, why did they put this in aside from the entertainment side? And the only thing that I could see is that it really doesn't bring up a philosophical point about life, but it really does show the relationship between Chi and Yu. And since Chi is the much more self-conscious and serious one of the two, this dream sequence helps show just how frustrated Chi can get due to the happy-go-lucky nature of Yu. That's the only thing that I could come up with. But it does turn out to be a very abstract story, and of the three. And it is the one that also was a little bit disturbing of the three, not only in the dream sequence, but there were these very strange buildings to which they were, lying and sleeping underneath. And you were wondering, what exactly are these buildings? They almost look like the buildings were impaled by these giant rods of metal. And you're not exactly sure why the previous people built this. But it is disturbing to see such an image in any case. And so it was, of the three, probably my least enjoyable, although I did enjoy it quite a bit, but of the three, it was probably the least enjoyable. Although it may be very interesting to a lot of people who find this abstract sort of story to be very, entertaining. And so this brings us to the final story of the episode, titled The Sound of Rain. And from a plot point, this is probably the least plot-worthy of the three episodes. Basically, the story starts out where they're traveling in an intense rainstorm, and they decide to take shelter in a nearby small building. And they wait for the rain to stop, and when it does, they decide to keep on going, and that's basically the entire story. However, it's all within the details of what happens while they are stopped. And during that time, they're laying all their clothes and everything out to dry. And Yu decides to put her helmet onto a ledge nearby. And it just happens that the rain starts dripping water onto the helmet. And it does it in a rhythmical pattern, which Yu notices. And she becomes fascinated by the rhythm. And so she starts, finding other objects, borrowing Chi's helmet, and putting it in another location where the rain is dripping. And through that, they start getting this, combination of rhythms, a beat going. And it makes them look at each other and go, this is quite enjoyable, but what the heck is it? And of course, the revelation is that in their lives, even something as simple and basic as music is not available to them. And so when they hear the beats, they find it to be extremely enjoyable, and they decide to sit there and take in this music. But of course, from their perspective, they're not exactly sure what it is, and so they can only just sit there and just enjoy the situation that they're in. And it brings out some very interesting points of imagination that comes out through listening to the rhythm of the rain. And so it becomes a very peaceful feeling for watching the story. But at the same time, it does give, once again, a revelation of just how even the simple things become quite enjoyable and important for these two girls. And of course, as mentioned, eventually it does end, in which case the girls are like a little bit disgruntled that they can't enjoy the rhythm anymore. But with the sun coming up, they decide that it's time to move on, and they go off on their journey. And so, these stories are very, very simplistic in nature. There's nothing really that ever happens, no more than any of the other episodes of Girls' Last Tour. And in fact, there's no real revelation progression in the journey that they're going. There's no more understanding of the world that they're in. But it does give a little bit more insight into their lifestyle, things that they don't have that they can't appreciate, and on a regular basis, but can on a short term while they experience it, but also the relationship that they two have. It's a very interesting relationship. They're not always the easiest to get along with, but they do understand that they're all that they have, and they continue to go along on the journey with that. And so I found this episode to be very entertaining and very emotional, in the sense that it doesn't really add to anything to the other 4 episodes in terms of revelation of the world. There is no world building in these 3 stories, but it does still give conveying a feeling of enjoyment and understanding of appreciation, and the calm and peaceful feeling that comes from enjoying the simple things in life. And because of that, I did find episode 5 to be very enjoyable. Anyway, that's about it for this episode. And if you watched Girls' Last Tour and saw episode 5, what do you think of it? Because it was a very different episode compared to the other 4. And how did you find it compared to the other 4's writing style? And which one of the 3 stories did you like, and why? Anyway, I'll continue with more Girls' Last Tour in the future. And I hope you join me when I upload more videos. And thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, please post them in the comment section below. And until the next episode, happy anime watching, happy enjoying of life. And as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.